If you have ever stood in a garden filled with $200,000 worth of imported hydrangeas and realized that you are worth less to your family than the catering bill, then you know exactly how I felt on that humid Tuesday in July. It was supposed to be a celebration of Grandma Marjorie's 90th birthday held at the family's summer estate in the Hamptons. The lawn was a manicured expanse of emerald green sloping gently down toward the water, dotted with white marquees and guests who held crystal flutes of champagne, as if they were extensions of their manicured fingers. But Grandma Marjorie wasn't there. She was 90 miles away in a palliative care facility in Connecticut, her lungs slowly giving up the ghost after 6 decades of smoking and 4 decades of running one of the largest textile conglomerates on the East Coast. My name is Eleanor. For 20 years, I have been the invisible engine of the Kensington Textile Group. I hold an MBA from Wharton and a master's in supply chain management, yet to the 300 guests sipping vintage Dom Perignon on the lawn, I was simply Virginia's other daughter, the quiet one, the one who checked the seating charts and ensured the ice sculptures didn't melt, while my sister Sylvia charmed the investors. Sylvia was 42, 2 years younger than me, and radiant in a way that required a team of stylists and a complete lack of internal conflict. She wore a pale yellow sundress that probably cost more than my first car, laughing theatrically at a joke made by a senator's wife. My mother, Virginia, hovered near her, a hawk in Chanel, her eyes scanning the crowd, not for friends, but for leverage. I adjusted the hem of my navy blazer, sensible and visible, and signaled the catering manager to bring out the second round of canapés. I had spent the last 3 months negotiating a merger that would save the company 15% in overhead costs, a deal I was finalizing while Sylvia was detoxing in a spa in Arizona. I assumed foolishly that today would just be another day of service to the family legacy. Then the music stopped. My father Lawrence tapped a silver spoon against his glass. He stood on the terrace steps, looking every inch the patrician statesman, though everyone in the inner circle knew he hadn't made a real business decision since 1998. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the microphone system I had set up an hour earlier. "Thank you all for coming," Lawrence began, his voice practiced and smooth. "We miss our beloved Marjorie today, but we know she is with us in spirit. In her honor and to ensure the Kensington legacy thrives for the next century, Virginia and I have an announcement." My stomach tightened. I hadn't been briefed on an announcement. I looked at Virginia. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking directly at me, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "We have completed a total restructuring of the family trust and the company leadership," Lawrence continued. "Effective immediately, the entirety of Marjorie's controlling interest, her 51% share, will be transferred into a new trust, and the sole beneficiary and newly appointed CEO of Kensington Textiles will be our shining star, Sylvia." The applause was polite, rippling through the garden like a breeze. Sylvia feigned shock, placing a hand over her heart, mouthing, "Who, me?" to the crowd. I stood frozen near the service entrance, the tray of hors d'oeuvres in the waiter's hand beside me blurred. Marjorie's shares. That was impossible. Grandma Marjorie had told me explicitly and repeatedly for 20 years that the controlling interest would come to me. "You are the builder, Eleanor," she would say. "Sylvia is the decoration. You don't build a house on decoration." Virginia stepped up to the microphone, placing a hand on Lawrence's arm. "We believe that the modern market requires a modern face," she said, her voice dripping with that aggressive sweetness unique to Southern Connecticut socialites. "Sylvia embodies the vitality and charisma that Kensington needs. We are so proud to finally have leadership that reflects our family's aesthetic excellence." Aesthetic excellence. The code word for thin, charming, and malleable. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just about the money, it was the erasure. They were handing the company I had practically run for a decade to a woman who thought equity was something you had in a horse. I walked away from the service station, ignoring the waiter asking about the crab cakes. I cut through the crowd, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. I needed to get to Virginia. "Mom," I said, intercepting her as she descended the stairs, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked at me with a mix of boredom and irritation. "Eleanor, don't make a scene. You're scaring the senator." "You transferred Grandma's shares." I kept my voice low, trembling with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. "She's not even dead, Virginia. How did you get her to sign that? She's been in and out of consciousness for weeks?" Virginia took a sip of her wine, her eyes hard as flint. "We have power of attorney, Eleanor. We decided it was best to settle these matters while she was still with us, to avoid confusion later. Grandma promised those shares to me. We have a plan, the Kensington Protocol." "Oh, stop it with your protocols and your spreadsheets," Sylvia chimed in, drifting over with a fresh glass of champagne. She patted my cheek, her fingers cold from the glass. "Honestly, Elle, look at you. You're exhausted. You're frumpy. You don't want the pressure of being CEO. Mom and Dad are doing you a favor. You can finally retire. Maybe take up knitting." "We're doing what's best for the brand," Lawrence added, joining the huddle, refusing to meet my eyes. "Sylvia is the face. You, well, Eleanor, you've always been the help. And we simply cannot have the help running the manor." I looked at them, my father, my mother, my sister. They looked like a magazine ad for the American dream, glossy and perfect, and completely rotten on the inside. "I'm going to see Grandma," I said, turning away. "Don't bother," Virginia called after me, her voice light and airy. "She's heavily sedated. She won't know you're there. And even if she did, it's too late. The papers are filed." I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, leaving the hydrangeas and the champagne and the lie of the happy family behind me. I drove 90 miles to Connecticut, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. They thought they had won. They thought Marjorie was gone. But they forgot one thing: Marjorie Kensington didn't raise victims. She raised fighters. And they had just declared war on the wrong granddaughter. The drive to the hospice center in Connecticut took 2 hours, but my mind was racing so fast it felt like minutes. The transition from the sun-drenched, manicured falseness of the Hamptons to the sterile, quiet hallway of the palliative care unit was jarring. Here there was no champagne, no social posturing, only the rhythmic beep of monitors and the heavy antiseptic smell of mortality. I walked into room 304. Grandma Marjorie lay in the bed, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her silver hair, usually coiffed into an impenetrable helmet of authority, was thin and wispy against the white pillow. Her skin was like parchment paper, translucent and fragile. Tubes ran from her arm to a stand of fluids that dripped, 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 counting down the seconds she had left. I pulled a plastic chair close to the bed and took her hand. It was cold. "I'm here, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm sorry I left you alone with them." She didn't stir. Her breathing was shallow, a rattling sound that made my chest ache. I sat there for an hour, just watching the rise and fall of her chest, thinking about the betrayal. How could they? How could Lawrence, her own son, strip her of her legacy while she lay helpless? Around 4 p.m., the heavy oak door creaked open. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of Chanel No. 5 and expensive scotch announced them before they even spoke. "Oh, look!" Virginia's voice sliced through the quiet. "She's playing the grieving granddaughter. How touching." I stood up, keeping my hand on Marjorie's. "What are you doing here? I thought you had guests." "The party is winding down," Lawrence said, stepping into the room. He looked out of place in his linen suit, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He held a leather portfolio folder clutched to his chest like a shield. "We needed to stop by and ensure everything is in order." "In order?" I looked at the folder. "What is that?" Virginia walked past me to the other side of the bed. She looked down at her mother-in-law with an expression of mild distaste, as if Marjorie were a stain on the carpet. "It's a competency waiver and an affirmation of transfer. The lawyers just want one final signature to make the transition. Ironclad. Just in case anyone..." She cast a sharp glance at me, tries to contest the restructuring. She's unconscious, Virginia, I hissed, trying to keep my voice down. She can't sign anything. This is fraud. She has moments of lucidity, Sylvia said, breezing into the room behind them, checking her reflection in the dark screen of the vitals monitor. The doctor said so. We just need her to hold the pen. We can guide her hand. It's a formality, really. You are vultures, I said, my voice shaking. She is dying. Can't you give her a moment of peace? You already took the company. We took back what belongs to the family image, Virginia corrected, snapping open the folder. She pulled out a sleek fountain pen. Marjorie built this company, yes, but she held on to it too long. She became way difficult, old, just like you, Eleanor, rigid, unexciting. Virginia leaned down close to Marjorie's ear. Marjorie, dear, it's Virginia. I need you to wake up for just a second. Marjorie's eyelids fluttered. She let out a low groan. That's it, Lawrence said, stepping forward eagerly. She's waking up. Get the pen ready. Grandma, don't, I pleaded, squeezing her hand. Virginia ignored me. She took Marjorie's limp hand and shoved the pen between her fingers. Just a little scratch here, Marjorie. For the family. For Sylvia. You want Sylvia to be happy, don't you, not Eleanor? Eleanor is… well, she's the worker bee, isn't she? She's not a queen. Marjorie's eyes opened. They were cloudy, unfocused. She looked at Virginia, then at Lawrence, then at Sylvia. That's right, Mother. Lawrence said, his voice trembling slightly. Just sign it. Then you can rest. We'll take care of everything. We'll make sure the company looks good. God knows it needs a facelift, Sylvia muttered, scrolling on her phone. The logo is hideous. Marjorie's hand moved weakly on the paper. Virginia guided it, forcing a jagged line across the signature block. Perfect, Virginia breathed. She snatched the paper away, blowing on the ink. Witnessed by family. Done. She looked at me, a triumph so ugly it made her beautiful face look monstrous. You see, Eleanor, even in her final moments, she chose us. She chose the future. Now leave us. We need to say our goodbyes, and frankly, you're depressing the mood. I'm not leaving her, I said. Actually, you are, Lawrence said, finding a scrap of courage now that the deed was done. We are the medical proxies. We are restricting visitors to immediate family only. And right now, you don't feel like family. You feel like a disgruntled employee. I looked at Marjorie. Her eyes had closed again. She looked defeated. Small. Fine, I said, grabbing my purse. I'll go, but this isn't over. Oh, honey. Virginia laughed, a dry, brittle sound. It was over the day you were born, with your father's nose and your grandmother's stubbornness instead of my charm. Go home, clean out your desk. We'll send you a check. They turned their backs on me, surrounding the bed, creating a wall of linen and silk between me and the woman who raised me. I walked out of the room, the sound of their murmuring voices fading behind me. I felt hollowed out, defeated. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, crying until I couldn't breathe. Then I watched them leave. I watched Lawrence, Virginia, and Sylvia walk out of the hospice center, laughing high on their victory. They got into their Bentley and drove away, leaving their dying matriarch alone in the dark. I waited until their taillights disappeared. Then I wiped my face, fixed my hair, and walked back into the building. I wasn't going to let her die alone. Even if they had security throw me out, I had to try. But I didn't know then that the woman in room 304 wasn't defeated. She was just waiting. 2 days after the incident at the hospice, the reality of my new existence hit me with the physical force of a locked door. I arrived at the Kensington Textiles headquarters in downtown Manhattan at 7 a.m., just as I had every weekday for the past 15 years. The building was a steel and glass monolith that Grandma Marjorie had purchased in the 80s, a symbol of our permanence in the industry. I carried a coffee and a tablet loaded with the logistics reports for the Asian distribution centers. I walked up to the security turnstile, tapped my ID badge, and waited for the familiar beep. Instead, the light turned red. Access denied. I frowned and tapped it again. Access denied. Ms. Kensington. I turned to see Eddie, the head of lobby security, walking toward me. Eddie had known me since I was an intern. He looked down at his shoes, his face flushed with embarrassment. Eddie, something's wrong with the system, I said, forcing a smile. My badge isn't working. I'm sorry, Eleanor, he said quietly. I've been instructed to escort you to HR on the 4th floor. You can't go up to the executive suite. My stomach dropped. Instructed by whom? He didn't answer. He just gestured toward the freight elevator. Not the executive lift. The freight elevator. The ride up was silent. When the doors opened, the director of human resources, a woman named Beatrice, who I had hired 3 years ago, was waiting. She wouldn't meet my eyes either. This way, Eleanor, she said. She led me to a small conference room. Sitting there was not my father, nor my mother. Just a stranger in a gray suit corporate counsel I didn't recognize, and a cardboard box. What is this? I asked, my voice echoing in the small room. Eleanor. Beatrice began reading from a script on the table. As part of the corporate restructuring announced by the new CEO Sylvia Kensington, the position of Director of Operations is being eliminated. Your duties are being absorbed by the new brand strategy team. Absorbed? I laughed, a harsh sound. Beatrice, the brand strategy team consists of two 20-year-olds who run Sylvia's Instagram. They don't know how to manage a supply chain. They don't know how to hedge cotton futures. The company will hemorrhage money within a month. That is no longer your concern, the stranger in the gray suit said. He slid a thick envelope across the table. This is a separation agreement. It offers you 6 months of severance pay, strictly contingent on your signing a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause. You will not speak to the press, you will not contact clients, and you will not set foot in this building again. I opened the envelope. The check was for $20,000. A pittance. An insult. And if I don't sign, then you get nothing, he said simply. And the family will cut off your access to the trust dividends immediately. The door opened then and my parents walked in. They must have been watching from the next room. Virginia looked immaculate in a cream pantsuit. Lawrence looked like he was trying to shrink into his collar. Make it easy on yourself, Eleanor, Virginia said, leaning against the doorframe. Don't fight it. You don't have the stomach for a war. Why? I asked, looking directly at my father. Dad, I saved this company in 2019. I fixed the debt crisis. Why are you doing this? Lawrence sighed, taking off his glasses and polishing them. Eleanor, you're competent. We know that. But Kensington is moving into a lifestyle brand. We need energy. We need youth. When people look at you, they see paperwork. When they look at Sylvia, they see aspiration. You're firing me because I'm not pretty enough. We're letting you go because you don't fit the vision, Virginia corrected. You're an artifact, darling, like a rotary phone, useful once, but now just clutter. She gestured to the cardboard box. We packed your personal effects, a few photos, your mug. Security will escort you out. I looked at the box, my life's work reduced to cardboard. You're making a mistake, I said, standing up. Sylvia can't run this. She will bankrupt you. Sylvia has vision, Virginia snapped. She has us. We don't need you clogging up the gears with your pessimism. Now go. And Eleanor, don't come to the house. We're changing the codes. I took the box. It was light. I walked out of the conference room past the glass walls of the offices where people I had mentored turned their heads away pretending to type. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral march. I stood on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, holding my box, the morning sun glaring off the glass tower that bore my family name. I was 38 years old. I had no job, no family, no legacy. But as I hailed a taxi, I touched the pocket of my blazer. Inside was a small velvet pouch I had retrieved from the hospice 2 days ago. I hadn't told them about that. I hadn't told them what happened after they left room 304. Virginia thought she had won because she held the pen. She didn't realize that the ink was already dry on a different page. Let's go back. Let's go back 48 hours to the hospice room, 5 minutes after the taillights of my parents' Bentley faded into the dusk. I had walked back into the room expecting to find Grandma Marjorie unconscious, drugged into oblivion by the heavy dose Virginia had watched the nurse administer. I sat down heavily in the chair, putting my head in my hands, weeping for the sheer helplessness of it all. Eleanor. The voice was raspy, dry as autumn leaves, but it was not weak, and it was definitely not senile. My head snapped up. Marjorie was sitting up. Her eyes, which had been cloudy and unfocused moments ago, were sharp, piercing, and terrifyingly clear. The blue in them burned with a cold fire. "Grandma?" I stammered. "I thought the medicine—" "Spat it out," she croaked. She pointed to a tissue balled up in her hand, hidden under the sheets. "Do you think I survived the corporate raids of the 80s by swallowing everything people tried to feed me?" She reached for the water cup on the bedside table, her hand shaking only slightly. She took a sip and looked at the door where her son and daughter-in-law had just exited. "They think I'm a vegetable," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They think I'm a prop. Just sign here, Marjorie. Just die, Marjorie." She let out a short, bitter laugh. Virginia always did underestimate the durability of old iron. "Grandma, you signed it," I said, panic rising in my chest again. "I saw you. You signed the transfer. They have the company." Marjorie looked at me and her expression softened. For the first time that day, she looked like my grandmother, not the titan of industry. "Oh, honey," she said, "you really think I would leave my life's work to a woman who thinks amortization is a skin treatment? But the signature is a scribble, sir," she said dismissively. "And it's on a document that is already obsolete. Reach into my nightstand, the bottom drawer, under the extra blankets." I did as she asked. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic, a burner phone, a cheap prepaid flip phone. "I had the nurse buy it for me 2 weeks ago," Marjorie said. "My regular phone. I knew Virginia monitored it. Dial the number saved as the Wolf." I opened the phone. There was only one contact. Sterling. Sterling was Arthur Sterling, the most terrifying corporate litigator in New York. He had been Marjorie's attack dog for 40 years, but my father had fired him 5 years ago, replacing him with a yes man. Or so we thought. I hit dial and put the phone to Marjorie's ear. "Arthur," Marjorie said. Her voice shifted. The rasp remained, but the tone was pure command. It was the voice that had made grown men cry in boardrooms in 1995. "It's done," she said. "They came. They mocked Eleanor. They forced the signature on the dummy document. Yes, they took the bait." She listened for a moment, her eyes fixed on me. "Execute protocol scorched earth," she said. "Tonight, everything we prepared in 2018, release the escrow on the Kensington shadow files, and Arthur makes sure the board gets the full packet regarding the marketing expenses. Yes, all of it." She paused. "And the will good. Bring it to the funeral. Not a moment sooner. Let them parade. Let them think they've won. Let them climb so high that the fall breaks every bone in their bodies." She handed the phone back to me. She looked exhausted now, the burst of energy fading. She sank back into the pillows. "Grandma," I whispered, holding the cheap phone like it was a holy relic. "What did you just do?" "I did what I should have done 10 years ago," she wheezed. "I protected the builder." Eleanor listened to me closely. She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "They are going to fire you, within the week. They will try to erase you. You have to let them. Let them. If you fight them now, they will settle quietly. They will give you a few million to go away, and they will ruin the company within a year. You cannot just beat them, Eleanor. You have to expose them. You have to let them stand in the sunlight and show the world exactly who they are." She coughed a terrible wet sound. "Take the phone," she said. "Hide it. Arthur will contact you. Do not say a word to your mother. Do not say a word to your father. Cry at the funeral. Be the poor, pathetic, ousted daughter. Be exactly what they think you are." "Why?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Because—" Marjorie closed her eyes, a small, terrifying smile touching her lips. "Nobody looks at the furniture until they trip over it. You are going to be the tripwire, my dear." She drifted off to sleep. Then, a real sleep this time. I sat there in the darkening room, the burner phone burning a hole in my pocket. So when I walked out of that office building with my cardboard box 2 days later, I wasn't just a fired employee, I was a spy, I was the tripwire, and the clock was ticking. Marjorie passed away 3 days after I was fired. The official cause was respiratory failure, but I knew the truth. She let go because her work was done. She had set the trap, and now she was simply leaving the stage so the play could begin. The funeral was held at St. Bartholomew's on Park Avenue. It was less a memorial service and more a coronation for Sylvia. The church was packed with the elite of the East Coast, rival CEOs, politicians, socialites, people who hadn't spoken to Marjorie in years, but wouldn't miss the photo op. The front pews were draped in lilies. A choir sang hauntingly beautiful hymns that Marjorie would have hated. She preferred jazz. I arrived early wearing a simple black dress, not the couture morning gowns my mother and sister were sporting. I walked toward the front row, the place reserved for immediate family. A funeral director, a man with a face like a basset hound, intercepted me. "Ms. Eleanor," he whispered, looking apologetic, "I'm afraid the seating chart has been adjusted." He gestured to the fourth row. Behind the board of directors, behind the mayor, behind the vice presidents of the company. "My mother's instructions?" I asked. He nodded. She felt it was important for the new leadership to be unified at the front. I looked at the front row. Lawrence sat there looking somber and dignified. Virginia was next to him, dabbing dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. And Sylvia sat in Marjorie's spot, wearing a black veil that was so dramatic it looked like a costume from a Gothic romance. She was holding court, leaning over to whisper to the chairman of the board. I took my seat in the fourth row, wedged between a second cousin I hadn't seen in a decade and a mid-level manager from the accounting department. The service was a masterclass in narcissism. Lawrence gave the first eulogy. He spoke for 20 minutes about vision and legacy and passing the torch, mentioning Marjorie's name only twice. He used the word Sylvia 6 times. Then Sylvia went up. She stood at the pulpit looking out over the crowd with practiced poise. "Grandma was a pioneer," Sylvia said, her voice catching perfectly on cue. "But she was also tired. In her final days, she told me, 'Sylvia, you are the light this company needs. It is a heavy burden, but one I accept with humility.'" A lie. A bold-faced, sacrilegious lie told over the body of the woman who despised her. I dug my fingernails into my palms to keep from screaming. I looked around the room. Most people were nodding, eating it up. But in the shadows of the side aisle, I saw a figure standing against a marble pillar. Arthur Sterling. He was older now, his hair white, leaning on a cane. But his eyes were sharp. He was watching Sylvia with the look of a man watching a cockroach crawl across a dinner plate. After the service, the crowd moved to the reception at the plaza. I lingered on the steps of the church, watching the casket being loaded into the hearse. "Miss Eleanor." I turned. Sterling stood there. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply looked at me. "Mr. Sterling," I said. "It's been a long time." "Indeed." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Marjorie's personal seal. "The board meets next Friday," Sterling said, his voice low gravel. "Emergency session to ratify Sylvia's appointment as permanent chairman and CEO. They think it's a formality." He pressed the envelope into my hand. "Do not open this until you are inside the boardroom. It contains your entry ticket." "They won't let me in," I said. "Security has my photo." "Security is handled." Sterling said, a rare, thin smile cracking his face. Eddie in the lobby, Marjorie paid for his daughter's tuition. He's loyal to the name, not the title. And you? I asked. Will you be there? I am the executor, he said. I will be there to read the will, but the will is just the closing act, Eleanor. You are the main event. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the New York crowd. I looked down at the envelope. It was heavy. It felt like a weapon. I skipped the reception. I went back to my small apartment, opened a bottle of cheap wine, and waited. For 7 days, I watched the news. I watched Sylvia give interviews on CNBC, talking about synergy and rebranding. I watched the stock price dip, then stabilize, as the market waited to see what the golden child would do. They were celebrating. They were toasting their victory. But they had forgotten the most important rule of business. Read the fine print. Friday morning arrived with a thunderstorm that battered the city, turning the sky a bruised purple. It was fitting. I dressed carefully, not in the drab office wear I had worn for years, but in a tailored charcoal suit I had bought with my severance check. I pulled my hair back tight. I put on the pearl earrings Marjorie had given me for my graduation, the real ones, not the paste copies Sylvia wore. I arrived at the headquarters at 8:55 a.m. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I walked to the security desk. Eddie was there. He looked nervous, but when he saw me, he nodded. He didn't ask for a badge. He simply swiped his MasterCard and opened the gate. "Good luck, Miss Eleanor," he whispered. "Thank you, Eddie." I took the executive elevator. The numbers climbed 10, 20, 40, 50. The doors opened onto the penthouse floor. The reception area was quiet. The secretary, a woman named Janice who terrified everyone, looked up over her glasses. Her eyes widened. "Eleanor, you can't be here." "I'm here for the meeting, Janice." "You're not on the list. Mr. Kensington gave strict orders." I walked past her desk. "Call him if you want, but I'm going in." I pushed open the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. The conversation inside stopped instantly. 12 heads turned. At the head of the table sat Lawrence with Sylvia to his right and Virginia to his left. They looked like royalty holding court. "What is the meaning of this?" Lawrence stood up, his face flushing red. "Security? How did you get up here?" "Sit down, Dad," I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room. "Get out," Virginia hissed, standing up too. "You are trespassing. We fired you. You have no business here." "Actually," came a voice from the corner of the room. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the shadows. He had been sitting in the observer's chair unnoticed. He walked to the table and placed a heavy briefcase on the polished wood. "She has every right to be here," Sterling said. "Sterling." Lawrence looked confused. "You don't represent this company anymore. You were dismissed." "I represent the estate of Marjorie Kensington," Sterling corrected. "And until the will is probated and the shares formally transferred, the estate holds the controlling interest. Eleanor is here as my proxy." "That's absurd," Sylvia laughed, though it sounded shrill. "Grandma signed the transfer. The shares are mine. We have the document." "We have a document," Sterling said. "We'll get to that. But for now, under the corporate bylaws, any shareholder with proxy status may address the board regarding matters of executive competency." The chairman of the board, a stoic man named Robert Vance, looked at Sterling, then at me. Vance had worked with Marjorie for 30 years. He had always been neutral, a man of numbers. "Let her speak," Vance said. "Robert," Virginia gasped. "If she has standing, she speaks," Vance said, crossing his arms. "Proceed, Eleanor. You have 5 minutes." I walked to the foot of the table. I placed the cream envelope Sterling had given me on the wood. I didn't open it yet. "I'm not here to beg for my job back," I said, looking at each board member in turn. "I'm here to save your investment." "Oh, please." Sylvia rolled her eyes. She's going to bore us with spreadsheets. I'm going to talk about theft, I said. The room went deadly silent. I'm going to talk about the marketing expenses account. I continued looking directly at Virginia. And I'm going to talk about why the company has been bleeding cash for 5 years and why the only reason we haven't gone under is because I have been covering the losses with operational efficiency gains. Virginia's face went pale. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, I said. Because I'm the one who balanced the books you cooked. I nodded to Sterling. Play the tape. Sterling pulled a small remote from his pocket and pointed it at the massive screen at the front of the room. The logo of Kensington Textiles disappeared, replaced by shaky vertical video footage. It was the hospice room. The date stamp in the corner read, July 14th, 4:45 p.m. The image resolved. Marjorie Kensington was sitting up in bed looking directly into the camera lens of the burner phone. A collective gasp went around the table. They had all been told she was comatose in her final days. My name is Marjorie Kensington, the video Marjorie said. Her voice was amplified by the boardroom speakers filling the space with her ghostly authority. I am of sound mind. I am recording this statement to be played in the event of my death. On the screen, Marjorie took a sip of water. My son Lawrence and his wife Virginia have just left this room. They forced a signature from me on a transfer of assets document. I want to state for the record I was aware of their actions. I allowed it to happen to gather evidence of their duplicity. Lawrence sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. That document is void, Marjorie continued. But more importantly, I am here to address the financial irregularities of the last 5 years. The board has been told that our shrinking margins are due to market forces. This is a lie. She held up a sheaf of papers in the video. Virginia Kensington has been siphoning company funds through a shell company called VK Consulting. She lists it as marketing and branding services. In reality, these funds totaling $4 million over 5 years have been used to pay for Sylvia's personal debts, gambling losses in Monaco, and the maintenance of the Hamptons estate. The board members turned to look at Virginia. She was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Sylvia looked like she was about to vomit. That's not true, Virginia shrieked. It's a deep fake, eh? She was dying. She couldn't speak like that. I have the bank records here, Sterling said calmly, placing a stack of files on the table. Transfers from Kensington to VK Consulting, then immediately to personal accounts held by Sylvia and Virginia. On the screen, Marjorie continued. I was too old and too tired to fight them alone, so I relied on the only person in this family who actually works. Eleanor. Marjorie smiled at the camera. Eleanor noticed the missing money 3 years ago. She came to me. I told her to wait. I told her to cover it up in the quarterly reports to balance it against logistics savings to keep the stock price stable until I could deal with it. She didn't want to. She wanted to go to the police. I begged her to protect the family name. That was my mistake. Eleanor isn't the slow one, Marjorie said, her voice turning hard. She isn't the boring one. She is the one who kept this ship afloat while the rest of them drilled holes in the hull. The video ended. The screen went black. Robert Vance, the chairman, stood up. He picked up the bank records Sterling had put down. He leafed through them, his face darkening with every page. He looked at Lawrence. Is this true? Did you authorize these payments? I, Lawrence stammered. It was branding, lifestyle management. It's a legitimate expense for a high-profile family. It's embezzlement, Vance said coldly, and it's corporate fraud. But I'm the CEO, Sylvia shouted, standing up. I own the shares. Grandma signed them to me. About that, I said, stepping forward. We need to talk about who actually runs this company, because it certainly isn't you, Sylvia. You think this matters? Sylvia sneered, though her hands were shaking. So what if Mom took some money? We can pay it back. The company is still mine. I have the vision. I have the Kensington protocol. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The Kensington Protocol, Sylvia. At least get the name right. I know what it is, she snapped. It's the strategic growth plan, the one the consultants wrote in 2019. It saved us from the recession. Consultants didn't write it, I said quietly. Of course they did, Virginia interjected, trying to regain her footing. We paid the McKinsey Group $2 million for that strategy. You paid them? I agreed. And they delivered a generic cost-cutting plan that would have gutted our manufacturing capability. Grandma threw it in the trash. I opened the cream envelope Sterling had given me. Inside wasn't a will, not yet. It was a bound manuscript, dated January 2019. This is the original draft of the Kensington Protocol, I said, holding it up. Look at the handwriting in the margins. Robert Vance leaned in. That's your handwriting, Eleanor. I wrote the protocol, I said. I redesigned the supply chain. I negotiated the cotton futures in Egypt. I automated the warehouses. I did it at night on weekends while Sylvia was at Fashion Week and Mom was hosting galas. I wrote it, gave it to Grandma, and she implemented it under her name because she knew you, I pointed at my father, would never listen to me. Liar? Sylvia hissed. Test me, I said. I turned to the whiteboard behind the chairman. I picked up a marker. Sylvia, I said, my voice sharp. Explain the hedging strategy for our Q4 wool imports. If the Australian dollar strengthens by 10% against the USD, what is our exposure? Sylvia stared at me. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at Virginia. Mom. Don't look at her, I said. Look at the board. You're the CEO. It's a basic question. How do we hedge currency risk? Sylvia's face crumbled. I hire people for that. I'm the big picture person. The big picture is made of small details, I said. If you don't know the risk, you lose $10 million in a week. I turned to the board. The answer is we use forward contracts locked at the June rate, covering 60% of projected volume. It's on page 40 of the report you clearly didn't read. I threw the marker on the table. It clattered loudly in the silence. She doesn't know how the company works, Sterling said from the corner. She never has. But she has the shares, Virginia screamed, slamming her hand on the table. The transfer is legal. You can't take it back just because she's not good at math. The transfer, Sterling said, walking slowly toward the table, was signed by a woman who had been medically sedated under duress. You can't prove that, Lawrence said. The doctor. I don't need to prove the duress, Sterling said. He pulled a second document from his briefcase. Because the transfer attempts to move shares that Marjorie Kensington no longer owned. Virginia froze. What? This, Sterling held up a document with a blue cover, is the Kensington Family Trust amended in 2010. It states that upon any diagnosis of terminal illness, the voting shares automatically transfer into a blind trust to be released only upon the reading of the last will and testament. Marjorie didn't own those shares in the Hospice, Virginia. The trust did. Her signature on your scrap of paper was meaningless. And the will? Vance asked. I have it here, Sterling said. He looked at me. And it was updated 4 days ago via secure courier. The air in the room felt heavy, pressurized. Lawrence had slumped into his chair, looking like a man who had just realized the parachute wasn't opening. Read it, Vance commanded. Sterling put on his reading glasses. I, Marjorie Kensington, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous wills regarding the controlling interest of 51% of Kensington Textiles. He paused. Virginia was holding her breath. I bequeath the entirety of the shares to my granddaughter Eleanor Kensington. A sob broke from Sylvia's throat, a real, ugly sound. Furthermore, Sterling continued, I appoint Eleanor Kensington as the permanent CEO, effective immediately. This bequest is made in recognition of her sole authorship of the company's success over the last decade and her integrity in the face of familial corruption. No, Virginia whispered. No, no, no. We have the house. We have the pension. Section 4. Sterling read his voice devoid of pity. Regarding Lawrence and Virginia Kensington, due to the evidence of embezzlement documented in the attached files, they are hereby removed from the board of directors. Their stipends are terminated. They are to repay the $4 million misappropriated from the company within 90 days, or the estate will pursue criminal charges. Criminal charges? Lawrence squeaked. She would put her own son in jail. She gave you a choice, I said. I looked at my father. She waited. She gave you a chance to do the right thing at the hospice. If you had just held her hand, if you had just been a son instead of a vulture, maybe she would have been merciful. But you showed her who you were. And Sylvia asked, her voice small. What about me? You are removed from all executive positions, Sterling read. You will receive a monthly allowance of $5,000 contingent on drug testing and no public disparagement of the company. 5,000? Sylvia stood up, her face red. I can't live on $5,000. My rent is 12 so. Then move, I said. Sylvia looked at me with pure hatred. I hate you. I have always hated you. You're just jealous because Mom loved me more. She didn't love you, Sylvia, I said, feeling a wave of pity for my sister. She used you. You were her vanity project. And now that the funding is cut, look at her. Sylvia looked at Virginia. Virginia wasn't looking at her daughter. She was frantically typing on her phone, probably trying to transfer assets before the accounts were frozen. Mom, Sylvia asked. Virginia ignored her. Robert Vance stood up. I move to ratify the will and appoint Eleanor Kensington as CEO. All in favor. 11 hands went up. Motion carried, Vance said. He looked at my parents. Security will escort you out. Please leave your badges on the table. It wasn't a fight in the end. It was a collapse. Lawrence laid his badge down with a trembling hand. Virginia threw hers across the table, glaring at me. Sylvia just cried, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, ruining the perfect aesthetic she had tried so hard to maintain. I watched them leave, the same way I had watched them leave the hospice. But this time I wasn't crying. The office was quiet. It was 6:00 p.m. The storm had passed, leaving the Manhattan skyline washed clean and glittering in the twilight. I sat in Grandma Marjorie's chair. It was a little big for me, the leather worn soft by decades of her tenure. On the desk, the burner phone sat next to the crystal paperweight. There was a knock on the door. Sterling poked his head in. They're gone, he said. The locks have been changed. The forensic accountants are already going through Virginia's shell company records. Did they have anywhere to go? I asked. They went to the Hamptons house, Sterling said. Though per the will that property is now yours. You can evict them if you wish. I turned my chair to look out the window. I had the power now. I could crush them. I could put them on the street. I could prosecute them for the fraud and see them behind bars. It was what they would have done to me. No, I said. Sterling raised an eyebrow. Eleanor, let them stay in the Hamptons house, I said. But put the deed in a trust controlled by the company. They can live there, but they can't sell it. They can't borrow against it. And Lawrence, give him a title. Brand Ambassador Emeritus or something. Give him a small stipend, enough to live, not enough to show off. Why? Sterling asked. After everything. Because if I destroy them, I become them, I said. Grandma didn't give me this company to settle scores. She gave it to me to build something. They are irrelevant now, Arthur. They are ghosts in a house they don't own. That is punishment enough. Sterling smiled, a genuine smile this time. Marjorie was right about you. About what was? She told me once. Sylvia has my face. Virginia has my greed. But Eleanor has my spine. He nodded and left the office, closing the door softly. I was alone. Finally, truly alone at the top. I looked at the portrait of Marjorie hanging on the far wall. She looked stern, formidable. But I knew the truth now. I knew about the burner phone under the sheets. I knew about the love that looked like a weapon. I picked up a pen. The same kind of pen Virginia had tried to force into a dying woman's hand. I pulled a fresh stack of logistics reports toward me. There was work to do. The wool markets were opening in Sydney in 3 hours. The supply chain needed tightening. The legacy needed saving. I wasn't the pretty one. I wasn't the charming one. I was the one who did the work. And as the sun went down over the city, I realized that was the only inheritance that ever really mattered. The silence in that boardroom wasn't just the silence of shock. It was the silence of truth finally entering a room where lies had lived comfortably for too long. Eleanor's mercy at the end wasn't weakness. It was the ultimate flex. By refusing to destroy her family, she proved she was something they could never be secure. True power isn't about how loudly you can scream or how much you can take. It's about what you can build when everyone else expects you to crumble. Would you have evicted the parents and pressed charges, or did Eleanor make the right choice by showing mercy? Have you ever been the invisible worker in your family or job, while someone else took the credit? Let me know in the comments below. If Eleanor's victory gave you chills, please like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.